In the Arctic, far above the Norwegian mainland and just off Russia's northern coast, lies one of the most unusual territorial arrangements in the world: Norway's sovereignty over the Svalbard archipelago, including islands situated inside what would otherwise be considered Russian waters. The roots of this anomaly go back centuries, long before the rise of the modern Norwegian or Russian states, to a time when the Arctic was an open and contested frontier. The Svalbard archipelago, sometimes called Spitsbergen after its largest island, was unknown to most of Europe until the late 16th century. In 1596, the Dutch navigator Willem Barentsz reached the islands during his attempt to find the Northeast Passage. Soon after, whalers from the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, and later England and France began exploiting the region for bowhead whales. During this period, Svalbard was treated as terra nullius land belonging to no one. No single power enforced sovereignty, and the area was used freely by various nations for hunting and exploration. Through the 17th and 18th centuries, conflicts broke out over whaling rights. Dutch, Danish, Norwegian, and English whalers all tried to establish dominance in the bays and fjords of Svalbard, but none could sustain permanent control. After the decline of the whaling industry in the 18th century, interest in Svalbard waned, leaving the islands largely abandoned, with only occasional visits by Russian pummer hunters from the White Sea and Norwegian trappers from Tromsø and Finnmark. By the 19th century, with the rise of industrial activity in the Arctic, Svalbard regained attention. Expeditions from several European countries, including Sweden, Russia, and Norway, carried out scientific surveys. Coal deposits were discovered, and soon commercial mining became viable. Yet still, Svalbard remained outside any recognized state's jurisdiction. The situation was highly unusual, an inhabited landmass in Europe with no sovereign authority. Norway, at the time in union with Sweden until 1905, had long-standing economic interests in Svalbard through its fishing and hunting communities. Russia likewise had traditions of pommar hunting there, and Russian entrepreneurs began to invest in coal mines in the early 20th century. British, Dutch, and American companies also staked claims. By the early 1900s, Svalbard had become a patchwork of international economic interests, with no legal framework governing property, taxation, or administration. The First World War changed the picture. After the war, the victorious Allied powers sought to bring order to Svalbard as part of the post-war settlement. During the Paris Peace Conference, Norway lobbied for sovereignty over the archipelago, arguing that its proximity to the Norwegian mainland and its long-standing use by Norwegians justified recognition. Russia, then engulfed in the civil war following the Bolshevik Revolution, was unable to effectively participate in negotiations. In 1920, the Treaty of Paris, commonly known as the Svalbard Treaty, was signed by the major Allied powers and later acceded to by many other states. The treaty granted Norway full sovereignty over the Svalbard archipelago, but with significant restrictions. Article 9 of the treaty prohibited the establishment of naval bases or fortifications, keeping Svalbard demilitarized. Most importantly, Article 3 granted all signatory states equal rights to engage in commercial activities such as mining, fishing, and industry on the islands. This created a unique arrangement. Norway was a sovereign state, but its sovereignty was limited by international obligations. The treaty entered into force in 1925, and Norway formally incorporated Svalbard as part of its territory. The Soviet Union, after initial hesitation, signed the treaty in 1924 and became one of the key participants. Over the following decades, Norway exercised administrative authority over Svalbard, establishing Longyearbyen as the administrative center. But Soviet companies, most notably Trust Arktikigol, operated coal mines in Barentsburg and Pyramiden, employing Russian and Ukrainian workers. At the height of the Cold War, Svalbard became one of the few places where Norwegians and Soviets lived side by side under a framework of peaceful coexistence, even while their governments were adversaries. The question of an island inside Russia's waters arises from the geographical reality of the Barents Sea. Under modern international law, especially the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, coastal states are entitled to a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone (EEZ) extending from their shores. Ending from Russia, with its long Arctic coastline, claims a vast EEZ in the Barents Sea and Arctic Ocean. Yet within that zone lies the Svalbard archipelago, which is indisputably under Norwegian sovereignty by virtue of the Svalbard Treaty. The situation is further complicated by disputes over whether the equal economic rights granted by the treaty apply only to the land territory and territorial waters of Svalbard or also to its continental shelf and EEZ. Norway maintains that its sovereign rights to the continental shelf and EEZ around Svalbard are exclusive, not subject to the non-discrimination clause of the treaty. Russia, however, argues that the treaty's provisions extend to the waters and seabed around the islands. This disagreement has fueled tension, particularly over fishing rights and potential oil and gas resources in the Barents Sea. Nevertheless, the basic fact remains: Norway owns the islands, even though they lie deep inside waters that, under normal circumstances, would be considered Russian. This is not a modern geopolitical accident, but the outcome of a century-old treaty rooted in centuries of open access and competing claims. Today, the Svalbard archipelago continues to reflect this unique history. Longyearbyen remains a Norwegian town governed under Norwegian law, while Barentsburg operates as a Russian mining settlement under the auspices of a Russian state company, yet subject to Norwegian sovereignty. International scientific stations and research projects also function on the islands under the treaty's provisions. The arrangement endures as one of the most remarkable legal geographical compromises in the world. A Norwegian territory located inside Russia's Arctic sphere of influence, but anchored in an international treaty that continues to regulate its status a century after it was signed.